PTSD isn't reserved for those who've been to war or faced life-threatening situations. From childhood adversity to workplace stress, PTSD can stem from a variety of experiences. Stick around as we dive into the diverse faces of PTSD and how to heal. Hello, and welcome to this growing community of people who are ready to heal naturally with food, diet, and lifestyle medicine. I'm Carrie Bailey, your functional nutritionist. I work with people with anxiety, depression, and other weird mystery symptoms. Let's jump into today's video. PTSD is on a spectrum, if you will, right? You can have a little PTSD, a lot of little cuts, or you can have extreme PTSD. One is like death by a many cuts, and other is like one major tragic event. Both forms of PTSD are valid. It's normal to feel terrified if your life is in danger or the life of your loved ones is in danger. This fear triggers the fight or flight response, which triggers adrenaline and then cortisol. This is what gives you the superhuman strength to lift a car off a human, for instance. The threat may be gone, but you're left with emotional aftershocks. This is the common form of PTSD that therapists and mental health practitioners know. Day-to-day emotional wounds can create the same effect, only in a smaller dose. These are the less obvious forms of PTSD. This might be a bad experience in a relationship that caused you to fear future dating or making a commitment. This might be why one person can ride on a roller coaster and love it and just want to do it again, and another person that might be just terrified to death and never want to ride on a roller coaster again. As a kid, I had this experience with my mom. I remember calling for my mom, no response, mom, no response. By the third time I said mom, she yelled at me like horribly. And I was immediately terrified and traumatized by that. And just anybody ever yelling at me again was terrifying. And again, was that a big T trauma or was that a little T trauma? These are the little kind of traumas that can lead to eating disorders or using food or alcohol or drugs or adrenaline junkie, driving fast type activities to ease our pain. There's still some stigma around these issues, but it's much more resources than there were 40 years ago. So whether you struggled with big T trauma, kidnapping, abuse, violence, or little T trauma, rejection, car accidents, things like that, those all can have the same physiological response in the body. If you've ridden in a plane and if you've experienced turbulence, that might be terrifying for one person and make them never want to get on an airplane again. For me, I guess I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love turbulence. It's fun to me. I don't have this fear that the plane is going to fall out of the sky. For me, it's just a silly little ride. And my daughter, when she was 8 years old, she got in a car accident and she was one of 4 people in that car. And she was the only one that wasn't physically injured. But to this day, she's not ready to get her driver's license. And she's had a few experiences where she was triggered by the smell. One time we were at the beach and we opened the car door, and that car door against the cement created that same smell that triggered the emotions back from that event. So she was having a PTSD event. You might be betrayed by someone cheating on you, never to want to have you date or be in a relationship ever again. Miscarriages can cause a fear of conceiving to the point where you cannot conceive, right? You actually physiologically can't conceive because you've got that fear going on. These events and triggers are the types of things that I need to know when I'm doing an intake for someone, right? And all really high quality healthcare professionals need to know that these kind of events happen for you. But the therapist may not actually consider these PTSD. They might consider these just life's ups and downs, but I would consider it PTSD. These little life assaults change who we are and how we relate to the world. Health issues can trigger PTSD. It can sometimes stop the healing process. They might be so afraid of not feeling well that they create this freeze response where they're not able to move forward. They're not able to try a supplement or a food because they're so much fear that they're going to feel worse instead of better. I see this a lot, especially in older people or people who have been sick for a really long time. They literally have a distrust. They have this fear that prevents them from moving forward. But all this information is part of somebody's story. It's important for me to understand so that I can help them. And it's important for them to understand if it's a block in preventing them from getting healthy. So if you've been to doctor after doctor and been treated like you were crazy or you're making this up and that there's really nothing wrong with you and you're not getting any diagnosis, this can cause a lot of mental emotional pain. I'm here to validate that you are not a hypochondriac. You are not making this stuff up. We are now at the 4-year anniversary, believe it or not, of the pandemic, which was a huge trigger for a lot of people for PTSD. I think if there wasn't people triggered before the pandemic, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, I would say every person on earth has had some degree of PTSD. There's PTSD from fear of getting COVID. There's PTSD of fear of contracting COVID. There's PTSD from the loss of community and family and friends and isolation. That was a huge one for me. Isolation of COVID was huge. PTSD from people with long COVID, not necessarily COVID caused the PTSD, but the COVID triggered it, or PTSD that COVID triggered the illness from coming back or getting worse. COVID might have triggered brand new symptoms or a flare-up of chronic symptoms. You might not even notice it, honestly, as PTSD. It might be some kind of subconscious memory or unexplained feelings of avoidance or shutting down emotionally and not understanding why. You might crave sweets or caffeine or adrenaline junkie activities. These are signs that you are struggling with PTSD. In addition to the support of a therapist and doing the inner work, the nutrition can be really helpful in healing from PTSD. Did you know that a lack of glucose in the brain when you are experiencing these traumas can actually make the traumas worse? Did you know that a lack of glucose in the brain might actually be part of the reason that you're struggling with PTSD? Glucose feeds your nervous system. It protects your nervous system. Give in to your cravings for sweets. This is your body asking for glucose. Now, people that have a very thick skin or things that just don't bother them, they just roll off their back like water on a duck, these people have ample glucose on board. So these traumatic events don't affect them. So your sources of glucose are your natural sugars, right? You don't want the cookies, the cakes, the processed things, because those all have fat in them. If that's all you're surrounded by, that's what you're going to reach for. So be conscious about the types of glucose that you're looking for. The best sources of glucose for your body to heal is fruits. So apples, bananas, grapes. Honey is an excellent one, raw honey, maple syrup, not Aunt Jemima, and starchy carbs like potatoes, sweet potatoes, acorn squash, butternut squash. Glucose protects your brain in 3 ways. It prevents your brain cells, tissues, and neurons from being saturated in the acidity of adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline and cortisol gets released when you have fear, anger, frustration, and hopelessness. So by having that glucose on board, it's like a protective layer that prevents that acid from the adrenaline and the cortisol from hurting your brain. When there's a trauma, it actually creates an electrical storm in your brain. It affects the tissues and the glial cells. The glial cells are a little like your lymphatic system in your brain. So if you have enough glucose on board, you're going to be able to weather that electrical storm in your brain from the trauma, be it physical, emotional, and whether it's in a car accident or bike accident. Those traumas are going to be protected if you have enough glucose in your brain. The third way is that glucose prevents brain shrinkage. It prevents atrophy. Think of it like this. The analogy is like coolant in the car. So glucose to the brain is like coolant in your car. So when your car is running, in order for it to not overheat, it uses coolant to keep itself cool. And that's the same thing that your brain does with glucose. Glucose is the coolant for your brain. So similarly, if you were to eat something hot and spicy, it's going to burn your mouth and tongue. But if you put glucose or sugar in there, you'll notice it prevents your tongue from burning. It protects it from the heat. This might surprise you, but the more traumas you've had in your life, the more adverse childhood experiences that you have, the less glucose you have on board. Trauma's high, glucose is low. This is why glucose or sugar is so calming and that we crave this when we have stress and we reach for sugar. This is your subconscious addressing a physical debt of glucose. If you notice you have an experience, be it positive or negative, after that and you have that huge release of adrenaline in your body, again, like after a wedding, you might, or at some other event that's really positive, and you come down and all that adrenaline excitement is gone, you might actually notice that you are physically depressed after that, because as all that adrenaline leaves your brain, you get depressed. Again, why people looking for adrenaline, like the drugs and the alcohol and the adrenaline junkie, to feel better. I'd like to redefine PTSD as the lingering uncomfortable feelings, whether they're mild or extreme, that result from any adverse encounter that limits a person in any way. That's pretty broad, right? The best way to heal these injuries, these emotional injuries and wounds, is to overwrite them with positive experiences, new and positive experiences, to erase the old ones. Is it Joe Dispenza that says, rewrite your thoughts? Meditation, going on walks in nature, to reset, reprogram your brain, going on vacation. We want to really reprogram all those injuries that happened in our brain. You want to keep adding in new and positive experiences to overwrite all that old trauma programs. Healing takes time, patience, and key nutrients. It's important to find the mental, emotional, spiritual healing modalities that speak to you. What are your favorite mental, emotional, and spiritual healing modalities? All right, let's jump into foods. Let's talk about glucose. So how do we get this glucose in and make it work for us? The best glucose-rich foods to bring in are melons: watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew melon, bananas, persimmon, figs, sweet potatoes, dates, tangerines, mango, and apples. There are two foods that it's really important to avoid, and that are eggs and dairy. You also want to make sure that the fat you eat is taken away from your fruits and glucose sources. So how would you do that? You want to keep animal protein, nuts, seeds, and oils out of the meals that you have glucose in. You can do this a couple different ways. You can have a breakfast and lunch. Let's say it's fruit for lunch and fruit for breakfast, sweet potatoes for lunch. And then you can have an animal protein dinner if you like. You can also you can do it that way on a daily basis. That way, the fat's coming in later, away from the fruit and away from the glucose, right? That way the glucose that you have at breakfast and lunch is getting into your system and you're digesting it before you get to the fat. The other way is maybe twice a week you have a fat-free day completely and you have no fats and you have lots of glucose-rich foods. If you need more support, check out my anxiety and depression recovery guide in the description and comments below. There I give you tips and tricks and recipes and everything you need to get you started on your healing journey. All right, let's jump into supplement. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you've been here before and you haven't watched all my videos, I would say go back and watch my videos, because in previous videos, I talk about a lot of nutrients that would be great for PTSD. This includes B12, B complex, magnesium, lemon balm, GABA, and vitamin C, plus the 3 new ones I want to talk about today. Okay, so today I recommend curcumin, ashwagandha, and licorice root. Curcumin is awesome. You can actually do turmeric if you want. You could take a turmeric root. It looks a lot like a ginger root. You could take that root and you could juice it. You could peel it and slice it and throw it in a salad. You can chop it up and put it in any kind of curry dish you like, any kind of dish you like. You can throw it in a smoothie. Now, turmeric is high in manganese and also contains the nutrient curcumin. Curcumin is the bioavailable ingredient that helps the inflammation. Your manganese helps your body form connective tissue, bones, blood clotting factors, and sex hormones. Instead of juicing turmeric, if you'd rather have curcumin, you can get that. I recommend a Thorne makes a curcumin phytosome, and they comes in 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams. And you could take that once or twice a day. Obviously, if you're a sensitive person, you want to start with a 500 milligram, although I haven't heard a lot of reactions for curcumin, but nothing surprises me. The second supplement I recommend is ashwagandha. This is one of my favorite adaptogenic herbs. So whether your stress is high and you want to bring it down, or things are too low and you want to bring it up, not that you want to bring up stress, but you know what I mean. Ashwagandha, the form that I like is by Gaia Herbs, and Gaia Herbs makes one that you could take 1 or 2 capsules twice a day, and that would really help your stress levels. And the last supplement is licorice root. Licorice root you can get in a tea form. I love traditional medicinals makes licorice root. You can also buy a tincture form, alcohol-free, by Nature's Answer. And you could take either 1 to 2 dropperfuls daily. And I recommend doing a 2-week on and 2-week off with that one. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to my channel so you can see more of these videos. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you in the next video.